Dirty Moderates, happy President's Day, and welcome to this special edition of Dirty Moderate. I am your Dirty Moderate, Adam Epstein, and I'm pleased to be doing something unique today. We here at Dirty Moderate, as you know, really were founded as a response to the crisis of democracy. The Trump years, the post-Trump years, we are first and foremost warriors for democracy. We are not a member of a political party. We are not Republicans or Democrats. We are small d Democrats because first and foremost, being vigilant about democracy means protecting everyone. And one of the things you've seen with the rise of the authoritarian right and the autocratic ways in which Trump and Trumpism have manifested into this poison have been the attack on minority communities, vulnerable communities, the historically disenfranchised, people who have been sidelined, people whose narrative is very American, but often gets placed elsewhere or gets forgotten or stigmatized or deplored or you name a word. And so in the coming months, we really want to explore a lot of different things about America, not just that we're here fighting for electoral wins for Team Blue because the Republican Party's become a fascist cult, but also because real people's lives matter and what people are doing in their world, in their field, and how to make changes. And we have a young, vibrant, dynamic guest today. Her name is Raven Schwam-Curtis. She is a Black and Jewish educator. I should say they are a Black and Jewish educator. They are an emblem of progress in this country. They are really at the intersection of what was famously called intersectionality, but it's unique because Raven has an important story to tell about being a Black Jewish girl in America, particularly in Gen Z. She is a TikTok dynamo star, superstar, all that. And the episode we're going to do today is going to talk about navigating this identity, navigating racial identity, her religious heritage, her cultural identity, the way those things intertwine, the way those things not just intersect, but inform one another. And so I'm really excited to have Raven. And going forward here in Dirty Moderate, we're going to be doing things like this. Obviously, we interview people every week here on the podcast. I'm hoping if you're watching this, you're subscribed, where anywhere you get your podcast. But apart from interviewing people, we're going to specialize in highlighting people's stories, right? So in addition to our normal content, we want to take a look at the American story. And that's everybody's story, especially where the banning of books is happening and all of these these really, I'd say, primal urges to go backward on the part of a lot of red states is resulting in the erasure of the story, right? The erasure of the American story. And the erasure of the American story is something that's damaging for all of us. America isn't all good or all bad, but to not talk about our origins and our history and how we got here and how this idea of America is ever evolving, right? We're always working toward a more perfect union, if perfection is possible. I'm not sure it is, but doing better. And it's definitely important now to highlight, right, in the fight for democracy, what despotism and what authoritarianism and what fascism, and they're not all the same thing, but they're cousins, what they're doing in terms of threatening the fundamentals of society. And we have people whose lives are deeply affected. Okay. And I am very pleased to have Raven Schwam-Curtis here today to talk about all these things. And Raven is going to join us now here live on this special Dirty Moderate episode. Raven Schwam-Curtis, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing, Adam?
Happy President's Day.
Oh, is it though?
Well, that's what we're going to talk about. I mean, first of all, as I was giving you the I don't know if you saw your introduction, but let's do it again. Raven Schwam-Curtis is a TikTok superstar spreading the Black Jewish word. Anyway, you are an amazing educator in the space. And I call it's your intersectionality, not to sideline Kimberly Crenshaw's famous theory, but you're looking at this great intersection that doesn't just intersect, as I was saying, but being Black and being Jewish informs you. And it informs your racial, your religious, but also your cultural identity, especially in the climate that we're in now, where, as I was saying in my introduction, when we say we fight for democracy at Dirty Moderate, we have to fight for democracy, right? That doesn't mean we're not. Yes, we are great warriors on the front lines against Trumpism and against all that stuff, and we do that every day. But we've also got to bring on people like yourself and others who can tell their story, because the narrative of America is the narrative of its people. It's their trajectories, their stories. And what do you think, Raven, you'd want people to take away from today's episode? Like, what do you think your aim is? We're so honored to have you here, and your credit score. Oh, she's also, by the way, about to get her master's in African American Studies, so she is the anti-Ron DeSanctimonious. But anyway, seriously, what do you think I really want to know. What would you like us to the audience, to take it away?
Absolutely. I mean, I think and hope that the audience will walk away with a better understanding of how to have nuanced conversations about really difficult topics that often get so contentious that we end up in these siloed vacuums where it's like far this or far that. And it's like, well, how can we meet in the middle and not necessarily in like bring those politics together such that they're moderate in a sense, but such that we're willing to engage deeply with where both parties are coming from, whether they be political or just people with different kind of ideological standpoints.
That's great. And the one thing I was going to say, and you and I always talk a lot off camera too, but well, we're going to have questions after the broadcast, after we do the interview. But I know sometimes the word, certainly among a certain generation and among certain groups of people, moderate feels like it's this dirty word, and Dirty Moderate's a play on that. Right. And when people say, does that mean, that you're sort of suspended in the middle and don't stand for anything? And I always say, and this is important for everyone, I said, no, actually, I believe the simple definition of moderate, though I'm politically homeless and not a Democrat or Republican, but simply put, I'm rejecting extremes. Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm saying this definition, I'm giving this definition to your audience, is you are rejecting extremes, because you're saying, hey guys, things are nuanced, things are complicated. I'm wrestling and navigating two different identities. And we're going to talk about in the interview the things you hear on one group to the other group. Even supposed allies in progress can have their own biases and prejudices and preconceptions that aren't progressive. Right?
Most definitely. I love that definition of moderate. And I wholeheartedly agree that when you look at folks like me who are in Gen Z, whenever we see the word moderate, like there is a negative connotation. I mean, even when I've been on dating apps and someone lists their political affiliation as moderate, it's like, red flag, right? But I appreciate the way that you're articulating it. And I agree, our politics are deeply, deeply aligned in that we're wanting to attend to the nuance. And that's what this episode's about.
Yeah, and I'll add the point, the name Dirty Moderate comes from one of my dearest friends who is a bone deep progressive. And we spoke right at the top of the beginning of 2020, and he called me. He'd been a Bernie guy anyway, and he had said, I'm going to go with Joe Biden. And he said that because he knew democracy was on the line. And that's what that means. And sure, he would have liked somebody more left, but now he realized what the reality was. And I said to him, you are a dirty moderate. That's where it came from. And it became, no, but he knows. And he shares, he's not exactly doing what you're doing by any means, but he shares I think a kind of foxhole with probably your beliefs. So I love to hear you appreciate us. We're not sellouts. We're not secret right wingers, and we're not secret left wingers. We're just moderates. All right. Well, number one, let's first off say thank you again for being here. Raven and I will have a Q&A after. Stick around. We're going to talk about the episode. Have a quick chat. We want to hear from you guys. But anyway, let's navigate identity, race, and otherwise with Raven Schwam-Curtis. Here we go. Dirty Moderates, I have got a special treat for you today. Those of you who listen to me know that I love having new and vibrant voices on the program, but I don't only have that today. I have someone I've known for a long time who has emerged as a potent force of inclusion and justice on TikTok and in Black Jewish spaces. I call her like an avatar of the, let's say, Gen Z consciousness out there. And I watch her videos, love her, know her mom like she's family. I've known her since she's 12. Folks, Raven Schwam-Curtis joins Dirty Moderate today. Hi, Raven.
Hi, Adam. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited. And I always tell people, you know, the truth on here. If I know you, I don't know you, because we're breaking the fourth wall. But let's dive into it. All right. So I wanted to talk to you for many, many reasons. But before we get into it, how about you tell everybody why you're doing, how you got to do what you're doing, why you're doing it, how that relates to your background, and then I think we'll dive into how it's so relevant to what's going on today.
Totally. So, hi everyone. My name is Raven Schwam-Curtis. I wear many hats in my life. So I'm actually currently finishing up my master's degree in African American Studies at Northwestern University.
So timely.
So timely, right? So that's like kind of one very big part of my life right now. Monday to Wednesday, I'm on campus.
Pause.
And then when I am not on campus, I'm doing social media full time. So mostly on TikTok. That's where I started out with social media, but also on Instagram. And really my whole mission in those spaces started with me feeling that academia was just so insular, right? Like you have all these people in this very small, private, elite kind of space speaking in a chasm of sorts. And then, but like, where does the information go? Like, where is the impact? I always found myself like, thinking to myself, this is so brilliant, but where is the impact? How can we reach more people with these thoughts and ideas? That led me to social media, because that's a very democratized, like, place to reach folks, to find community, to be in conversation. And so I just started translating what I was learning in the class to social media. And that kind of transformed over time into me discussing more of like my lived experiences, being Black and Jewish. And so that's a big part of what I do now, talk about being Black and Jewish.
You know, it's interesting you say that. You know, we talked a lot when you graduated from Cornell about you going on to graduate school. And as you know, I got my master's in American Studies at Brown. And I actually felt the same thing. You know, there was a part of me, well, I could stay in school forever. And I contemplated strongly, you know, pursuing a doctorate. I didn't do it because I felt like you felt. I felt if you can use use their voice with the privilege of having the kind of knowledge and background education, I mean that you and I both have been privy to, you gets out of the sort of rhetorical cul-de-sac that I think academia gets into, that I think chews on, because that's their mission. You know, but insular is a good word, because I also think that what I felt in my training, and it relates to what we're talking about here, is that there was an insularity that I think led to a kind of ideological stasis, not to be academic, but you know what I mean? The sense of just, we're like not going anywhere. We're identifying problems. We're not solving them. We're not, you know what I mean? It became like, we're identifying racism and oppression. And I would say, right. I mean, you know, yes, that's, okay, but what is the productive end to that? You know what I mean? The productive end to try to fight it, to try to be active, which is what you're doing, you know, in your space. And just to go back to basics, what is, when you say you're getting a master's, I want everybody to hear this, in African American Studies. What is African American Studies? Because it's now being thrown around as a talking point by the right, actually being cynically used by the left to sort of do their own shtick. As a nonpartisan, politically homeless guy who loves what you're doing, I want you to tell people what it is.
Yeah. Oh goodness, I could like probably give a 3-hour lecture on what African American Studies is.
You know, do a riff. I mean, it's not a, you know,
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, in a nutshell, African American Studies, at least in my department, so it varies. African American would insinuate that like one is just talking about the continental U.S., right? But in my particular department, African American Studies is essentially the study of the African diaspora. So people who identify as African and or Black across time and space, how we've experienced life, how we've experienced subjugation, and how we've also experienced joy, because we're so much more in excess of that trauma. And, you know, really exploring those histories as they intersect with other folks and people.
Right. So, you know, you've got, obviously we've seen which has been a great time to be a student. I was a student in 2016. Trump gets elected, and you've seen a resetting in the United States. You know, we've always had trouble agreeing on our story or even reckoning with any sense of our story. But you've seen this horrible reset, this reactionary reset, which Trump didn't create. He was a symptom of, but he reframed in a really, really toxic, horrible way, which was that division would be the lingua franca of our politics. That would be our language. That would be the go-to. And of course, race is always the chief way to bait, you know? And that began this whole excavation into who are we as Americans? Why are we here? How could America do this? How could we go from Barack Obama to Donald Trump? And how could we elect Donald Trump to begin with? You know, I'm a never Trumper first and foremost. Talk about the most unfit man to hold office. Talk about a fraud, a con man, a liar, all the words. A man who, you know, does not appeal to Lincoln's better angels. This is a man who is the classic populist demagogue. Populist being that kind of dirty populism, in the tradition of Father Coughlin and Charles Lindbergh and all these people that stoke division in a country that always has fault lines, right? That always has very, very sensitive fault lines that any political arsonist, which is what he is, can explode. And I think that did a lot for us to awaken. But this is the other thing I think that happened, which is why I think what you do is so great in the political world, which I'm in, right? And you are too, but in the world of like dealing just with politics all the time and the parties. And that's why I'm not a member of a party. I think the left lost its goddamn mind, meaning everyone was up in arms. There was trauma. Yes. But as time has gone on, it's been easier to take the bait and chew on it rather than say, what's this mean? Which is what you do. You know, you take a Black and Jewish identity, both of which, your mom being Black, your dad being Jewish, and you explain how to reconcile that.
Totally.
You know, and I'm asking you this because I find sometimes, and again, I'm broadly speaking, that activists on the left and people like that use identity as a cudgel, you know, kind of as a weapon, not necessarily to get some sunlight on it, but to sort of shut down any kind of debate, you know. And decent thinking people, I think the majority of us abhor what Trump represents and the racism of him. His election was a fluke anyway. But tell everybody how you're threading your needle, because I watch your videos, and especially the Black-Jewish relationship. I know I'm loading a lot of questions in, but I'm gonna give you the floor. You know, anti-Semitism being prevalent. You know, the reflexive hostility to Israel many on the left have, not understanding what those implications are. Like, talk about like how you've come to try to reconcile your identities and why you've created a space for that. I know. I'm just curious.
No, I have so many thoughts. I mean, I think in a world where hot takes go viral online, and like the more extreme you are, the more popular your video gets. There's not always a lot of space for nuance. And so if I had to pick one word to describe sort of my way of operating online, it would be nuance. I'm never there to give like a quick.
You don't.
No, like we're going to get into the nitty gritty, as you said. And I think that is to some extent kind of built into just like who I am as a person, being Black.
That's what dirty moderate is. That, you know, it's a play. The whole thing is we want nuance, because everything isn't this or that. As we know, and it's our country, our human beings tend to love the binary, not just Americans, you know, just it's got to be this or it's got to be that. But go on, I interrupted you.
No, you're good. And that notion of the binary, I feel like the binaries are something that my generation, Gen Z in particular, is really intent on disrupting, dismantling, questioning, interrogating, right? Like in all kinds of different ways when it comes to race. So maybe someone will look at me and say, oh, well, you are white appearing, so you should only identify as this, or you are multiracial, so you can only identify as that. Like I have people in my comments telling me who I am all the time.
Oh, of course. Well, I think that's a function that speaks to what I'm saying, you know, that there is a, there's an industry behind it. I don't mean they're grifting, so to speak, but there's a sense of people creating, trying to make sense of where they are. So that leads to them projecting that on you and saying, well, you have to be this because you're this. And, you are nothing if not a boundary breaker. I mean, you're defying expectations all the time because I don't think people know what to do. You know what I mean? Because they expect your hipness and your intelligence and how you appear to be this. The other thing you don't do, and you mentioned it in your first, in your introduction or your initial answer, you do joy. I mean, you don't do, you don't wallow, you don't come at things with venom. You teach, and you do it in a joyous way. And what the country needs, especially more than anything, the teaching moment. Generation older than you, mine, and even beyond, or just an understanding of how we can make our way in the world, doing better, right, than we've done, and trying to learn from you guys, and vice versa.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. I'm glad it comes through in the work that,
yes,
love, joy, and care are really central to how I even, like, for myself, continue to do the work. Because if I was showing up online every day and talking about anti-Semitism and Black trauma and, like, genuinely these really heavy, like, serious, challenging, deeply personal topics with like a stone cold face, I don't know that I could continue to do the work personally. Like, I need that joy. I need to do it in a joyous way so that I can be buoyant as I do the work. And I think that's also part of my politics insofar that, like, it's not just about the impact, it's how it feels as I'm doing it too. Like, if I'm going to care for other people and care for community, that starts with me. And it sounds really corny to say, like, you can't love other people until you love yourself. But it is so true.
Oh, that's so true.
It translates to this space as well. Absolutely.
What, how would you describe your brass tack politics? I don't mean the sort of gestalt and the larger. I mean, are you a Democrat? Are you an independent? Are you a Republican? I don't know. Maybe
that would be a surprise.
You never know. You never know. The Republicans could use somebody like you. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh my gosh!
I know. I'm teasing you. Yeah.
No, I definitely identify as a Democrat. I mean, that being said, in the spirit of being critical of binaries, this is not to say that I, like, wholesale endorse everything that the Democratic Party is doing. I wholesale endorse every Democratic person. Part of that also is historical, right? Like, the Black community in the United States, even the Jewish community in the United States, is historically, like, very much leans into the Democratic Party. So part of that is me being a product of my environment as well.
Right. If you had to, and I love it because I'm not a member of either party. I'm a lapsed Democrat because I found that there's just no room for nuance, especially after the Trump era. And I don't think I actually fit in as a Democrat for a lot of reasons because I'm a bit of a political unicorn. Do you give me 3 criticisms? Because I'm fascinated from your perspective you would have of our politics today, and then specifically of the Democratic Party. There's no wrong answers here. I just, like, what would be, if you were to, you name me 3 things you think are broken about our politics, and then that 3 things that you think the Democrats are not doing right or failing at, because they're your party, and you and I both agree the Republicans are such a dumpster fire. So, but go ahead.
So 3 things that are broken about our politics: lack of nuance.
Yep.
I would say also, like, trying to formulate my thoughts, like a lack of care for one another, a complete dehumanization of people who do not, like, align with your political worldview.
That's right. Yeah.
And then lastly, I would say the weaponization of identity, I think, is something that both Democratic and Republican people do a lot, which I'm like deeply critical of. And insofar that identity becomes a tool of both the left and the right to enact their political desires, not insofar that it helps the people that they're naming, but insofar that it furthers a certain political agenda. And that's critical of.
Yeah. So where do you think the Democrats are going wrong specifically?
Where do I think the Democrats are going wrong specifically? I know I speak in very lofty terms. I'm like a theorist. I'm always like, let's talk.
It's great. No, I love, that's why you're here. This is not, there's not like a pre-cleared answer sheet you need to have. I'm just, like, asking because I think your voice is so unique and so important. I think, like, how do you, through your prism, I learn from you all the time. Where I might be missing things. What you just said is literally core to what I believe in too. I mean, we can break it down, but weaponization of identity that went on today, we'll get into that. The whole issue of our politics lacking nuance, which cheats us all
Absolutely.
of having a conversation, a discourse.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So like what like of the Democratic Party though would you take issue with? Would it be an economic thing? Would it be social? Would it be foreign policy? I mean, pick your poison.
Pick my poison, right? I feel like for some reason I'm still thinking along the lines of identity. I think one thing that I take issue with on the left is that in an effort to seem quote unquote woke or like down or whatever, there's a weird cyclical way in which identity becomes like reaffirmed and is almost
I like that.
Almost becomes like inherent or natural or biological in a way that I'm deeply critical of. Like, yes, we can talk about what it means to be a Black person, absolutely, and like be pro-Black and all the things. And at the same time, we can't have that discourse without recognizing fundamentally that Blackness, racial categories, are colonial constructions, are not inherently true, are not biological truths.
Very interesting.
You know, so if that's the case, then like
that's a great point. Let me jump in. I was going to say, well, I have this thing too, and I've talked about it with your mom too, and when we have deep discussions about it.
Yeah.
If race is a social construct, and it is, right? Blackness kind of is an American racial construct. The idea of it, not exclusively, but it's been used extensively and exclusively in American history in a specific way. Absolutely. But if it is a social construct, right, and it's something that should be abhorred, to your point, why, right? I pose it to the left because I don't subscribe to this. And why do you come back to making everything just about that categorization? Even at the expense of trying to get to the core of an issue.
Yeah.
Right. It almost has like a built-in immunity. That's terrible. Let me go into what's happening today in Washington. I don't know if you're following this, but Ilhan Omar was voted off of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Now, I do not like her. I don't agree with her politically, but she has said abhorrently anti-Semitic things. From 2012 on, she's made no bones about it. Sadly, Rashida Tlaib is the same way. But here's what I'm watching. The Democrats don't want her to go. The Republicans are throwing her off. Is there a built-in hostility to her because she's a Muslim? And of course. And because she's a Black? Yeah. Because she's a woman of color? Yes. But what I'm reading on my comments and my tweets and the thing is, if you're on the left, it doesn't matter because you can say whatever you want. You have an immunity on anti-Semitism because God forbid you're Islamophobic. What I'm saying is this is preposterous. Yeah. I speak out against any bigotry, as many of us do, but as a Jew, and I'm a very secular Jew, I am not comfortable with her comments. Yeah. And just because the right is crawling with anti-Semitic white nationalist pigs doesn't mean that she gets a pass. And I think that giving her a pass is morally wrong. But I also think it's a condescension. It reduces the agency, right? A woman of color, well, they can just get away with it because their category inoculates them. And I find this, to your point, I find this to be so damaging. Again, this is getting partisan politics is at work here too. The parties are going to stand up for each other. But come on, you can't say that people who live in Israel or who are Israeli or Jewish are evil dogs. Okay, not okay. That's Nazi language. Obviously, it's not Nazi, but I'm saying that's what Nazis called us vermin. I would never, ever, ever say something about any group in that language, but she did. Right. And you got to take there's a bad faith to what the Republicans are doing because it's vengeance against them Democrats throwing people off their committee. But I'm actually glad because there's got to be some accountability for those comments. It's not like she voted a way I didn't. Well, I don't agree with her. She's way too left for me. That doesn't get you. She has a right to do that. You have a right to believe what you want to believe. But I think she crossed lines. Do you see what I mean? And what's your take on that? And not specifically on the politics of it, but on the sort of theory of it.
Yeah, the theory of it. Absolutely. I mean, I think because there is this misconception that all Jewish people are white and are racialized as white.
Amen. That's right. You're right.
Don't take anti-Semitism seriously because they don't think that it's a real threat in the same way that anti-Blackness is or that anti-Asian racism is, et cetera, et cetera. And so that enables people like her to make deeply anti-Semitic comments and for them to not be taken seriously.
That's so well said. Yeah, it's so well said. Wow. It's no, I mean, it's one of the things I think about, first of all, like I think 46% of Jews in Israel are considered non-white, not by some outside group, by them. Mizrahi Jews, many Sephardic Jews who, by the way, were expelled. You want to talk about expelled from land? They were expelled from North Africa by Muslim governments. And, Israel's done its bad things too. I'm not saying, but there's human history is littered with oppression around all corners you would least expect. Yeah. But I think that that's true. I think that like when Whoopi Goldberg made her comments about the Holocaust, and she's like, well, you guys are white. You don't get it. It's like, well, wait a second. Here's what I said. And I like Whoopi. I do like her as an actress. I love her for all the years. My friends think she's a great person. I think she was clumsy. I don't think she has hate in her heart, but she needed a teaching moment. And my thing was like, well, Whoopi, I'm gay. I'm a Jew. Yeah, I'm white. Yes, my Eastern European lineage, I guess, makes me white. Am I really guilty to a system that you're saying that I'm not? I represent a kind of lack of understanding of your comments about Jewish people being categorized as a race by Hitler. They were.
Right.
It was racial elimination. It was the master race, the Aryan race. And Whoopi, you wouldn't lasted a day there. So you can speak in theory all you want. You were going to the camps too with every Roma and every Catholic and every, what I'm saying? And besides Jews, so I thought like it was everything to do with race. Now we know that was the poisonous anti-Semitic venomous creation of the Nazis, right? So yes, it's a religion, it's a culture, a group of people, but they racialized it. So to say that, it's as simple as everybody who's white and everybody who's black, again, belies the complexity, right, of identity and justice. And it's something that you have to thread all the time. This is my question too. In your spaces, your spaces and your age, did you find because ultimately you're sort of in two spaces, right? You got your feet in both.
Yes.
Did you find yourself, even people you adore or care about in school or whatever, who were, let's say, of color or on the left, doesn't have to be both or either, but sort of casually anti-Semitic without knowing it because of Israel and things like that, just sort of problematic in the things they would say that you would never say about another group with immunity?
Yeah, I mean, I think just overwhelmingly, most people that I know my age are staunchly pro-Palestine. Unless I'm in a Jewish space, like folks are pro-Palestine. And that's not to say being pro-Palestine is inherently anti-Semitic. But sometimes comments that accompany that can be really hurtful and harmful. I mean, for example, I know at Northwestern, our Jewish Studies department, it has like Israel in the name of it. It's like Israel and Jewish Studies, something or other. And one of my classmates made a comment to me about how like they thought that was super problematic because, what's the relationship between Israel and Jewish people and like Jewish studies, and that implies.
Did you say anything, or did you just took a pass?
Honestly, I'll be transparent. I don't think I had the language at that time to be like, hey, this isn't okay. And also it's like, we're both in a Black studies space. And in some ways, because I do live in this interstitial, sometimes I find myself having to validate like why I belong to be in Black spaces, or like that I'm really down for the cause. Because there's so many reasons people could be suspicious of me. I'm Jewish. I can be white appearing. I'm multiracial. I'm ethnically ambiguous, et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes,
and nor am I saying it's not your job to be the spokesperson either. And I get that sometimes you didn't say anything. I'm just fascinated because you're on both sides. Then you go into a white space and you hear the casual, latent, overt racism that the people say about the black community in America, and you kind of go, "Oh, like, do you think it's almost as if you're a
double agent."
I was going to say a licensed spy. You'd be good in the CIA, right? You could help out here. No, but that's so interesting. But see, back to the whole Palestine thing. It's such a complicated issue. The whole Middle East, as we know, and why Israel's there, and I'm such a staunch supporter of it. But what I find among certain people, I guess what bothers me is that I expect the right to be the far right, not traditional conservatism. That's been corroded and thrown out and misunderstood, and that has nothing to do with fascist state power. Those are two different things ideologically. And I expect the far right to just have such a panic about the changing demographic of America, to resent, the browning of America, the changes in sexuality and fluidity and gender. I expect that. I don't ever accept it, but I expect it. The conundrum, the problem for me, is watching young, educated people on the left not really know what they're talking about, but speaking in these sort of like broad anti-colonial tropes about Israel and having no idea of what's on the ground, like not even knowing that Hamas's charter is to wipe Israel off the map.
Right.
That's not a side note or a footnote. In the debate, people are like, well, Israel has, the settler movement is very problematic. But you can't take away from the fact, and they're not helping either, but you can't take away from the fact of that Israel's defense in 75 plus years or whatever has been mustered because of who they're surrounded by. You also can't take away from the fact that they've now made peace and economic agreements from a multitude of other Arab countries.
Yes. Absolutely.
And you can call it cynical, whatever, but it's there. And you know what? The argument used to be there won't be peace in the Middle East. This goes back to like the Golda Meir times when they would say, Jews, you'll never have peace until you make peace with Palestinians because the rest of the Arab world won't agree. Well, that's not true.
Right.
Some of that has to do with the Sunni Shia split because of the Gulf Arab states are Sunni and they hate Iran and Israel is a bulwark again. But it's also because the world's changed and there's new opportunity, and you can go into the United Arab Emirates now and from Israel and you can pray in safety. This is great. This is progress. This is Jewish Muslim progress that we should be applauding, and I don't know so all of this stuff gets kind of obscured in the left argument where they otherwise are speaking on the right side of justice, but then there's this blind spot, and anti-Semitism doesn't care about your ideology. It's discursive, to use a fancy word. It's insidious, right? It swallows us. Just because it comes from the left doesn't make it any less destructive or pernicious, right? It's not like, oh, people aren't going to listen to that. They're never going to beat Jews up or hurt them over that. They're just going to listen to Marjorie Taylor Greene. No. No distinction is made in the world's oldest, among the venom that arises from the world's oldest hatred.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. And I think what you're naming too, like this kind of broad anti-colonial framework that gets placed on Israel and Palestine, I think what's happening, at least in my approximation, is that this black-white binary that exists in the United States is being transposed onto a context where it does not neatly fit. And so people are drawing conclusions based on a framework that is not aligned with what it is they're actually addressing. So what do I mean when I say that? I mean, what we've been discussing, right? The fact that Israel is not a quote unquote white nation. Like there are Jews of color everywhere. Almost a majority of the nation does not identify as white. And so if we change this in our personal framings from this thing against white people and brown people to this very complex geopolitical situation that is deeply multiracial, then what does that mean, right? That changes the conversation entirely. And also the fact that so many like Jews who do not identify as white have sought refuge. Like even the discourse around refugees, like Palestinian folks being refugees, that's real. And there are people who identify as refugees who found refuge in Israel, who do not identify as white folks, who are Zionists. Like there's so many complicated nuances to it that I agree totally get lost on the left and then lend themselves to anti-Semitic vitriol that Jewish people feel in real time. And experience in synagogues, experience interpersonally, experience like I did when I was at Cornell and someone drew a swastika into the snow, right? Like there are real world consequences. Really? Oh, absolutely. And there's this.
Do we know that was that somebody? Are you saying that was somebody like theoretically from the left, like a person of color did that? We don't know.
Oh, I don't know. We never got to at least the campus didn't like disclose.
Because it's unfortunately possible that somebody would do that,
Oh, absolutely. But if the left is playing into anti-Semitic discourse, right, then inevitably the left is also contributing to those kinds of acts of hate. So even if that's not the intention.
Yeah, it's such a conundrum. The other thing, and that was beautifully answered, you distilled it perfectly. The other thing that happens too, I call this is my term. It's like the narcissism of being ahistorical. Okay, we're getting a little. What I mean is, there's a narcissism to people's ideas, especially social justice warriors, and I'm kind of being snarky. It's like they know all the answers, they have the answers, this is what is. And you go, okay, but you don't really know a lot of your history. Okay, everything's not in America. Okay, to your point, these tropes are coming out of European, and they're coming out of they're relational to European thought, Asian American thought, histories of the Ottoman Empire. I mean, this is very complicated. You know, and America is not the only empire that murdered and pillaged. I mean, hello, see Portugal and Spain, you know, which ravaged. I mean, they destroyed the Inca population in Peru. I'm just saying, you know, this doesn't mean that I'm absolving a generation of people in America who committed genocide against Native Americans or were slave owners. Both things can be true. This is what bothers me, you know. And so when I'll bring this up, and I have a pass because I'm a moderate and I probably am center right, and people know that I'm good faith, and all my liberal friends know that they listen. I come at it from a different way because people are I'm a Democrat and I subscribe to this, or as we were talking about. But I'm not both sidesing anything, okay? Just because we have a existential threat of people who try to overthrow the government, seditionists, traitors, liars, cretins, who are behind the worst guy ever to hold the presidency, who want to literally radically destroy America in their own way, in their own image, does not mean that people like Ilhan Omar and other people shouldn't be condemned as well. Just because the underlying rationales for two different theories are maybe don't have the same fervor, let's say, or the same menace, maybe is a way to put it. You know, the right is sort of more menacing, but the left doing that is equally harmful. And like you said, you're in a synagogue, you feel unsafe. There's no way to calculate, so, well, you know, it's really Marjorie Taylor Greene's fault. I mean, as bad as she is, you know, there's good people listening to what an Ilhan Omar says and feeding that, and it goes viral. And then, like you said, people of a certain ideology and generation, you know, go on to see, but they're attacking a woman of color. They are, but she did say some horrible things and that are not acceptable, that you're allowing one ism and not accepting another, or one phobia, and you know, it's
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think there's this idea that if you hold a marginalized identity, you must be like immutable, like you're immune type of thing. But anyway,
by the way, how condescending. I mean, to me, it's like I can't even imagine, and I give myself credit, not credit, because we would never talk like this. Be like, you know, Raven, you need to be with Ilhan Omar because, you know, you're biracial. I mean, what a horrible, but that's what the left is saying. Well, why would anybody say that? What's that have to do? You suddenly have no, you're informed by nothing other than your identity. You're reduced to just that. That's ridiculous. I mean,
I feel like what's happening is we're like in this weird moment where we don't know how to reconcile the fact that like race and racialization is a construction, but also that race and racialization has real world implications in how people are treated, what opportunities they're afforded. And so instead of kind of holding space for that in between, or maybe moving towards, I don't know, some scholars in Black studies talk about like the abolition of identity, even in gender studies as well. Like,
what do they mean by the abolition of identity? Can you give us the layman's version? You know, I'm just an Ivy League idiot. I don't know what you're talking about. No, go on, tell us.
Oh, well. So the abolition of identity, it sounds extreme, but essentially the notion is, okay, if we collectively understand, intellectually recognize that race is a fallacy, race is not a biological truth, it would then stand to follow that thing that is a fallacy should not guide the way that we move through the world, that we view the world, that we construct the world. And so that would require a certain kind of self-reflection, a kind of institutional deconstruction that decenters and eradicates identity. Now, I know that I want to be really clear. I know that the right will say things like this and be like, oh, well, if we're trying to abolish identity, then that means we don't need to do things like reparations or prison abolition. No, we have to reconcile the harms done and hold on to the histories. But what would it mean to move beyond identity, to move in excess of identity such that we're not internalizing a fallacy as truth?
That's so well said. Yeah, that's true. Right. It will be licensed for the right to say, see, we don't see colors, so this is perfect. That's not what you're saying.
Not a colorblind argument. I want to be
right. No. It's a very big distinction. But it's interesting. It is an academic argument, but I like it because I do think it would heal. Because human beings, all of us, are inherently capable of being selfish and greedy and cynical and manipulative as humans. This is built into the DNA. And you can't fundamentally change human nature. This is why I'm not a liberal per se, because you can't socially engineer this. See what I'm saying? You can be on the left and those qualities are still going to burble up for your own particular point. My point in saying this is, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to be battling each other into these sort of balkanized factions, and we could say, hey, we're really talking about injustice here, but I'm not going to say, hey, I'm a Jew, so therefore you can't say that, or whatever. I'm a person of color, you can't. It's a very fascinating theory. I know it's tough to probably put into practice, but you gave me a jumping off point about reparations. So here at Dirty Moderate, we're going to do this series on Black studies and Black history, and not just because of Black History Month, but the whole hyperbolic and misplaced, ridiculous reaction against things like critical race theory. And now what DeSantis is doing is so destructive. First of all, as a kid, I would have loved AP African American Studies. Yeah, that's my jam. But how? By the way, back during the 2020 stuff, and before I had this podcast, I'm like, hey, folks. Here, people say, what do you do? I said, first of all, you should all be reading James Baldwin and Toni Morrison, not just because I love them, but go read them. Listen, read it. The Fire Next Time. Go read The Bluest Eye. Go read James Baldwin's Price of the Ticket essays. Go read Many Thousands Gone. Go read Beloved, the whole thing, because that you're probably not even aware of that world. And I went to an elite private school and never read that. It wasn't until I got to become a political philosophy major at NYU, and a professor with an American studies focus brought that in, white professor, and made us learn, and it informed why I went on and did American studies. And so because we're going to do this series and we're going to tackle like a bunch of things, my point, getting back to my point, is, things like, what should we be studying? What should we be learning? What is Black history? Why is it important?
Yes.
Why does how does baked in systemic racism play out? What does it mean to be culpable, for that? Reparations is, and I'm going to do some shows. It's very interesting. It's very tricky because I don't know what I feel about it. What I mean by that is I don't oppose it in principle. I just don't know how to make it. I don't know, what does it mean? Does it mean we take $2 trillion and we distribute it to people that didn't get 40 acres and a mule? How do we identify who's Black? Who are you? In other words, are you Black? Were you Black and were you enslaved, or were you Black, or you're just, in other words, there are going to be members of the Black community who don't have that history, who could be Afro-Caribbean, who could say, well, we were slaves in Barbados or something. It's going to be complicated. So I don't know how to do it. Give me like your view on reparations, just broad stroke. Not. I'm not asking you to pass the bill. I just want. I just mean like, give me like the gestalt of that. Should we be doing it? Why? What does it really mean? I mean, I'm going to explore this.
Totally. I mean, I definitely think that reparations are valid and needed and important. That being said, I don't think that reparations are going to fix all the woes of Black relations.
That's important. That's important too, because I do think I've read people who said this is like the end game, and I'm like,
no,
it's never the end. That's that coming from Black writers, not me. And I'm like, how is that the end game of all things? We got a lot of problems. Anyway, go ahead.
No, 100%. I mean, it's a helpful Band-Aid, but a Band-Aid nonetheless. If we don't address the systemic issues behind the anti-Black racism, then money is only going to go so far. I mean, but that being said, wealth redistribution is very important because Black people are economically disadvantaged in this country, not because we're less capable or less whatever, but because we just haven't been afforded the same opportunities. And intergenerational wealth is also paralleled by intergenerational poverty.
Right.
So I would say, in terms of what a method would be to actually enact reparations, what that would look like, I agree it would be incredibly complicated. And I think in lieu of giving like a prescription, something I would caution us against or caution us to be more aware of is like not reverting to, I guess, like one drop rule notions of what race is in how folks are understanding the distribution of reparations.
Break it down. What's one drop rule?
So the one drop rule is essentially this notion that came out of the antebellum era here in the United States, that if one person has one drop of Black blood, and I'm using air quotes if you're watching
Yes.
the video because
Okay.
there's no such thing. If someone has 1 drop of black blood,
Yeah.
then they are Black. And the entire reason that the 1 drop rule was instituted was because it furthered the engine of slavery, right? So say a master of a plantation was inappropriate with an enslaved woman, had a child, that child would not be considered white because they had quote unquote 1 drop of black blood plus.
It's what Nazis, if you were half Jewish and had any Jewish blood, you were to be murdered. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So this fallacy of race or racialization being passed through the blood, I could see that being a part of the discourse of reparations. Like if you are biracial or if you're 70% Black or whatever even that means, right? If you're 70% this, then you get this allotment of money. I would heavily caution us against that. I don't know if there's like a neat way to go about it, but I do think handling things on a more like parochial level, like I know Evanston, which is actually just up the street from me, they have launched like one of the first reparations programs in the nation. I don't know all the details about it, but
wait, reparations program, and do you know who finances this, or who is it? A not-for-profit, probably, right?
Yeah, I'd have to look at more. I don't want to misspeak, but they've launched one of the first programs. And they're doing it based on like the local, like how folks have locally been impacted by institutions of slavery and like anti-Black racism and distributing wealth accordingly. So I don't know if there's going to be like a federal, maybe there's a federal law that says reparations.
Well, there's a committee. Well, no, there's a House committee. There's a committee that was in the previous Congresses. Like it's a commission to study reparations. There are no formal proposals. I mean, and by the way, in this overheated, childish, denuanced, to use a made-up word, climate, this is only going to generate more heat than light. This is going to become so radioactive. I don't even know that we can have a proper discussion about it, which is sad.
Yeah. No,
absolutely. You know, it's just going to be in the line of fire, and then talk about getting the right wing worked out, you know, and then they're going to smear it and lie, you know, it's going to be, it's difficult, but I think that's one of them. I mean, I think it's such a fascinating issue because I'm at a loss of what to do as well. You know, it's not something that I can say, I can say it's controversial, but then I can also say, well, Germany gave restitution to the Jews. Do you know, in America, we gave restitution to the Japanese Americans and an apology and money to those that were in internment camps, and lots of land to tribes and lots of money for all the treaties we abrogated and people we killed. It's not like we haven't done it, but it's interesting. We haven't done it for African Americans.
Right.
And the Jewish thing obviously was in Germany, but it's not like it's not been done. Oh, wait. So we've got information here. I want to go into this. The restorative, this is why having great producers is everything, Raven. Okay. So speaking of Raven's reparations, allusion here, the restorative housing fund adopted in 2021 by Evanston to address and rectify the city's racially discriminatory housing practices has sent its first reparation payments to residents. Oh, I think San Francisco's doing it too, come to think of it now that I read this. Could it be a model for other cities? So far, the first round of funds, which total $400,000, have been dispersed to 16 Evanston residents who each received $25,000. And the funds are dedicated to home improvements, mortgage assistance, or down payments. Okay. Well, here's the thing, too. I think that, you know, in the best American sense, you know, I'm a limited government guy and strongly believe private. You know, if you're not taking taxpayer dollars, and I'm not saying we shouldn't take them. I'm just saying put that aside. Mm-hmm. I think it could go down easier. I think part of it is there's going to be Dominican Republican immigrants who are working paycheck to paycheck right now, who are going to say, why am I being taxed for this? You know what I'm saying? And it's hard to have, as we talked about at the beginning, an academic kind of sociological argument. I always say this to your mom. I said, we can't just do sociology because it becomes rhetorically a cul-de-sac. Like, yes, we can identify all these things, but that in the real world, someone's going to say, I wasn't a slave owner. Are you kidding me? I fled a Caribbean, you know, that's the issue. So that's interesting. I did not know about this. It did bring to mind that San Francisco is trying some kind of program, but to your point, Raven, and we're going to talk about this in my series too, the generational wealth gap among African Americans because of how many generations that they were deprived on giving those foundations. First of all, they were promised 4 acres and a mule. Reconstruction was supposed to be this fantasy 4 million freedmen. There was a Freedmen's Bureau. There were all of a sudden for those 15 years, roughly 1865, 11 years, 12 years till 1876, till the troops were pulled out of till Hayes pulled the troops out of the South, and then the KKK rose. There were
Mhm.
black senators and black people in political life, and serious attempts at integration by what was then the radical Republican Party. The first black senator ever elected was from Mississippi, named Hiram Revels, and they are all Republican. The black community were Republicans in many cases all the way through Eisenhower. I mean, it's changed a little bit with Roosevelt. Then it changed with civil rights because, as we know, it flipped. But
Right.
the South was the not that racism was not woven in. I'm not suggesting that, but from a partisan standpoint, it was really the Democratic Party in the South, that launched the war on terror. Nathan Bedford Force, Ku Klux Klan. They were all Democratic, big D institutions, which is kind of amazing. I mean, when you think about where we are on race. But that being said, the generational wealth issue is very important because people forget how communities were redlined. Redline meaning someone took a red line and said, that's a black neighborhood. Yeah. We can't build there. And there's a great book, by the way, great academic book, but I've plugged it on the show before. When Affirmative Action Was White. It's by a political science professor, I believe he's at Columbia, Ira Katznelson, Katznelson. You might be reading in somebody might be reading in your program. It's great because it talks about the New Deal. Roosevelt made a deal with the South to keep them on board and to keep winning big electoral majorities, even though I think he was sympathetic, but it didn't matter. We're going back to the 30s, and he made sure that federal funds went to poor white communities and not black ones. And didn't allow, at the time of 25% unemployment and collapsed banks and the worst economic crisis we ever faced, there were still those racial economic fault lines drawn on purpose with full intention of doing harm, and so this is interesting. So just touching on one of the things. So TikTok. You are this is important. This is important because TikTok is this vehicle now for people to express themselves. I mean, there's tons of stuff on it I like. There's such stupidity on it too, but people with videos and also just fun stuff. But after a while, my dog is licking water out of a bowl and they go in and you see the tongue and they put music to it or something. It's like, whatever. Okay. It's cute. Do you think that right now it's the public square. It's the digital public square in ways that everything is, Twitter is, and whatever. Do you think that that's the most prominent or the most important? I'm trying to think of the word, pivotal maybe, space for young people to do their politics, to do their work.
In the digital space, absolutely, undeniably. I mean, there are over like a billion users who are on TikTok, right? Like the amount of people who use TikTok on a daily basis is actually astounding. That's why all these other platforms like Instagram and YouTube are running to make short form content opportunities for folks because they're trying to keep up. They don't want to get left in the dust because TikTok has risen so incredibly quickly. And a lot of folks have used TikTok as an organizing tool. I mean, Gen Z for Change, for example. A lot of my mutuals are involved with Gen Z for Change, which is basically a Gen Z oriented, like political leftist organizing space. And there's a whole team that's running it. There are folks who are like endorsing it, who have really large followings. And the whole point of it is like mass organization among Gen Z. So yes, I think TikTok is an incredibly powerful platform. And I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon.
Did you, because I've loved seeing you just explode. Did you become, is this an accident? Not your work, but did you just start posting videos and then it became, because you do such a unique thing and you thread the needle, so to speak, between your identities? Is that what happened? You began making videos and next thing you know, you're on Johnny Carson or what? I'm joking. What?
You're gonna giggle at me for this. So I actually wasn't really posting on TikTok for a while. Like I didn't start posting until maybe latter half of 2021, almost 2022. And the reason I started posting was because my mom was like, Raven, I feel like you have really interesting like socio-political takes. You should bring it to TikTok because that's like, I think you'll be able to grow quickly there. And like people will hear you. More importantly, you will be able to serve an audience there. So when I started out on TikTok, I was really mostly talking about Black studies topics. I wasn't really touching on Black and Jewish identity or relationality, any of that. The way that I fell into that kind of conversation was very random and serendipitous. It was like Hanukkah 2021. there was this audio that was trending at the time. It's like Hanukkah, Hanukkah, like okay, so yeah, see, you know it because you're on Jewish today.
I know. Well, I know the song. No, I mean, I'm Jewish. I remember singing it. Yeah.
So there was like a remix of that, and it was trending, and I thought it was fun. So I made a little video and I captioned it. This is your annual reminder that Black Jews exist. Really thinking nothing of it. That wasn't what I was really talking about on my page, so I didn't think it was going to land.
Was there anything, excuse me for a second, beside Hanukkah, was there an event at the moment that was erasing? Was there any kind of erasure going on, or was it just, you were just being celebratory about Hanukkah?
I was just being celebratory. Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to, because when I went under the audio, I mean, I was really only seeing Jews racialized as white. I think Trisha Paytas was like trending the top under that. I don't know if you know who Trisha Paytas is.
I'm not sure I know who that is. Is that?
She's like a very controversial YouTuber. She's said and done a lot of really problematic things like blackface and saying the N-word. And
really? Is she white?
Yeah. Yes.
Blackface?
Yeah. Yeah.
How old is this woman?
I think she's in her 30s, but she's married to a guy who I believe is Israeli. And so here in the last like 2 years or so, she started to identify very strongly as Jewish, which is not to say, you know, I don't know what her journey has been, right? But
so you don't know that she wasn't born Jewish, was she?
No. Which like she could always, I don't know what she did. I don't know the details. But long and short of it is I saw her trending under this audio and I was like, oh, come on, we can do better than this. Like, come on. And then I made this video, it went viral. And what was really interesting was, you know, in the comments, people were just incredulous. They could not believe that it was possible to be both Black and Jewish, which was shocking to me because, I mean, this is just who I am, right? Like, this is so normal to me. Right. But I think that's also the moment where I realized that, one, there were not enough Jews of color in this TikTok space talking about their lived experiences. And two, this misinformation of the Jewish community being overwhelmingly white and racialized as white was so commonplace that I was literally not legible to people. And that was a problem for me. So I decided to do something about it.
You know, it's so interesting. It's all pertinent to our discussion here. I mean, is there anything more true than the fact that ethnic and or racial categorization in our culture is nothing if not singular, you know, in the sense that the idea that that grouping, right, could be complicated by a multitude of ethnicities or a more multicultural racial background, whatever be considered, is so foreign to people. And that speaks to the binaries we're talking about. It speaks to it's not a word I created, the balkanization, is everybody's a group and you're in this group. Very bad, you know, and unfortunately, this sounds like conservative rhetoric. The bad faith rhetoric they'll use, going back to them, will be like, well, yeah, groups, it's all about individuals. And that's very naive. But what is true, the good faith argument where I stand is we are individuals. And people's, your agency, your autonomy, your voice, your views, your humanity is undermined if we see things only in stark, singular, binary group terms. Right? So you're an example of it. You lose your voice. That doesn't apply to you because you're not in one space or the other. You're in both. It's
a violent erasure. I mean, literally, and they're not. I mean, for multiracial people, for multicultural people, from like for folks who live in any kind of interstitial, not just multiracial people, it is a violent erasure to demand that people exist solely within the binary. And I think also my question too is, who does that serve? Who does the binary serve? Why are we so invested in a politics of policing how one identifies and moves through the world?
Right. That's right. Why are we policing? Well, it's interesting. Somebody tweeted, and I just don't remember who. I love the word policing, although it's a very fraught word, but I'm going to use it in a different sense. When things happen that are anti-Semitic or acts of violence, or legitimately Israel comes under attack, and then you see not just Jews, but Jewish people speaking up and saying how this harms them, it scares them for their existence. And other people say, yeah, but look at look at Netanyahu and whatever they may say. Somebody wrote, I just don't remember who, it was great. They said, it was a woman of color who said, someone from Black Twitter, you know, how dare anybody police another community that you're not in? As a Black woman, I don't like when people come to me and tell me what I should feel or shouldn't feel about a racial slight or a horrible thing like Tyre Nichols or whomever, you know. Stop policing other communities and show solidarity for what they feel. And when they speak, listen to them. That's what I do. If I talk to someone, I listen.
Mhm.
Your mom and I's foundation of our friendship is I listen.
Absolutely.
Obviously, yes, I'm evolved. I'm enlightened. But I'm going to get it wrong. I'm going to misunderstand. I'm going to need guidance. She is too with me on certain things. So I say, I listen. I ask, how does that make you feel? Did that happen? I don't just say, oh, well, you're dreaming about it. Everything's fine. It's like, what? It's a very fascinating thing. It's the old, you haven't walked in my shoes. So how the hell do you know?
Absolutely. I will say though, I feel like sometimes like yes and right, a Black feminist politics of yes and. I do think that we should feel empowered to speak on something that we feel like is not jiving with our politics, even if it is in a different community, right?
Well, yes, you make a good point, right? It's like, I'm not suggesting I can weigh in on policing as it relates to the Black community in the way that I hope is helpful, or make an either or argument too. Yes, that's exactly right. By the way, people can weigh in and say, I don't like Netanyahu, but I understand how Israel is existential for Jews at this time, but I don't hear, but yes, I don't hear that though.
Right. No, because of the binaries, because of the extremes.
Yeah, if I would hear somebody say, when I started hearing Israel's an apartheid state, everyone, okay, well, there's a lot wrong with that, and you don't know what you're talking about, and you don't know how many Arabs are in Israel and where they serve in the Knesset and on the Supreme Court. I'm just saying, like, talk about erasure, and then that is so full of horrific implications, as it should be, the term apartheid, but then you can't, you're not saying that you disagree with the government, right? I mean, Donald Trump's presidency, do you decide that you just hate the United States of America? I mean, I don't, right? I just hated what Trump represented.
I don't know. I mean, I do think, though, that people can be critical of Israel without being anti-Semitic, right? Like if it's about
they can be, yes.
If it's about the policies and like the way folks are being treated, that's one thing. But if you're being critical of Israel because you just hate Jewish people, like that's a different thing. It shouldn't be about them being Jewish.
Well, I think that anything online or anything viral or anything digital tends to amplify the worst, the loudest and the most hyperbolic voices.
I agree.
But they get the squeaky wheel gets the grease, they get the airtime, and they seldom lack nuance. And because dominant narratives are created through conformity, right, and through public opinion, you end up seeing comments that reaffirm their hyperbolic statements. What I'm saying is, I don't see, God, I've been a lifelong supporter of Israel, and I'm so disappointed. I know this is so important to the Jewish identity, Jewish existence, but I'm so disappointed with what Likud is doing and how this how this hurts other people. We can do better. I just don't really read that. I'm not saying it's not there. Maybe it's in some fantastic academic journal at Northwestern. It probably is, or somebody at Brown is talking about it, but the world isn't hearing that. And so again, like back to Ilhan Omar, as it relates to you and what you're doing, not what you're doing, you're not doing what she's doing, but what we're all doing. Words matter. Words matter. Rhetoric matters. If somebody with a voice, anybody in Congress, anybody of any color, any background, any party, utters racist, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, transphobic, pick a word, remarks at a podium, they have a platform they are abusing.
Yes. I couldn't agree more.
And I don't know why isn't that why we can't even all agree on that? It's like, how could we not agree? I mean, it doesn't, but I think also the rank partisanship that goes on, people are afraid. It's like, well, I don't want to be a Republican. No one said you're a Republican. You just can condemn what she's saying. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. It doesn't make me a Republican. It doesn't make me a conservative. I'm not afraid to be an old school conservative. I'm really not. I'm really in the center, but I'm not afraid to have certain conservative positions of the old school. I don't apologize for them. But that doesn't make me that or this.
Right.
Absolutely. And it also doesn't make me or you, for example, complicit in somebody in the evils of Trumpism. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So hence why you're doing what you, why you're doing what you do. So Raven, tell me this, what would be something you have you expose yourself so much, your soul, your ideas, your values. I mean that in the best way. But as we're closing out here, what is it people don't know about you that they should know? Break news.
Ooh, what is it that people don't know
Yeah.
about?
What is it you'd like people to know? What can you say here and now? Anything. I mean, that maybe you haven't told people yet that you want people to know. Certainly these listeners, but other people.
Um, I mean, I guess something that I really haven't discussed much on my platform, so this will probably be the most extensive discussion out there of me addressing this, is Israel and Palestine. And
Okay, great.
that existing, as a Black Jew and for other Black Jews like me, how incredibly touchy and scary it is to even like begin to tread on this topic, because it almost feels like you're caught between two warring communities. I mean, the Black community in the US is overwhelmingly pro-Arab. That was the founding of Israel was a big reason that the Black and Jewish alliance disintegrated in the latter half of the 20th century.
Exactly.
And so, like, what do I do with that? Because I feel like whatever I say, I'll make someone angry or upset. And I love my communities. I love both of my communities. I hear both of my communities, but I don't know how to always reconcile them. So I guess what I would say is, I have thoughts. I have informed takes, if you will, on what's happening in the Middle East, in this region of the world. But I need a safer, more nuanced environment to be able to speak my truth and for it to be received and heard. Because otherwise, I not to say I will never speak about it, but it will be exponentially harder for me too.
That's well said. Now, do you feel the enormity of the messaging that you're putting out there? Do you know that do you feel like you have a big responsibility?
To some extent, yeah, because I mean, I was talking about this with another Black Jew the other day. It feels like in the Jew of color space, there's still a lot of pioneering work happening. And I definitely recognize that maybe I'm being self-aggrandizing, but I understand myself as part of this emerging cohort of Gen Z Jew of color folks who are really embracing their identity, but trying to do so in a nuanced, critical type of way. So absolutely, I feel the weight of that. I have people reach out to me regularly and tell me about the impact of my work on them, that they've never seen another Black Jew. And this is the first time they're seeing someone, and it's in this digital space. And that's a tremendous honor and not something that I take lightly. So I just hope to continue fighting the good fight.
And so finally, what do you think, or do you think that's the biggest challenge that you have in terms of it, not just expanding your voice, but getting people to actually hear real details of what your identity means, that Black Jews exist, and what that what the challenge of reconciling those identities feels like, and do you feel that's the biggest challenge? And obviously that's what you want people to hear most, right?
Absolutely. I think it's so much easier to talk about the happy stuff, right? For me to do a little dance and talk about the Black and Jewish community had so much solidarity during the civil rights movement, and yay, huzzah, and here's how diverse we are. And I do a lot of that work because that matters too. It's so much harder to talk about the reconciliation bit, the tensions, the discontents, the anti-Black racism that I've experienced in the Jewish community, the anti-Semitism that I've encountered in the Black community. These are real parts of it too. And I think when we talk about solidarity and coalition building, people just want to talk about the happy, sunshiny parts, but you have to do all of it. You have to talk about the good and the bad to actually arrive at a place of true care and true community. Otherwise, all that's just going to be under the surface and it won't be resolved. So I think I'm challenging myself more in 2023 to do that more difficult side of the work, because it can be scary.
Okay. Amazing. Well, Raven, first, before you go, first of all, thank you. You're a superstar. For those who, I hope you're not just listening to this at this moment in your car or wherever you're listening to this podcast. I've known Raven since she's 12, and gives me, really good pleasure to watch you just thrive, because I think what you're doing is actually so important. It's not just because I adore you, but because I love what you're doing. But people need to find you and listen to. So the handle is at Raven Reveals. Is that right?
That's it.
At RAVEN Reveals, REVEALS. And that is where is that TikTok, Instagram, Twitter? Is that the same handle everywhere?
Yes, as well as YouTube.
And of course, she is available for keynote speaking, right?
Yes.
Is that right? Or then who do people, how does someone book you? I mean, is that go to your Instagram and find out? Is it all there?
Yes, it's very Gen Z of me. I have a link tree in all my bios everywhere. So if you click on that, the very
so do we. Yeah, we're old as though we are. We learned links. Well, we have a very young producer on our team who guides us. But anyway, yeah. So make sure you go to @Raven Reveals, folks. This has been, I think, not just a a really thought-provoking and I think also really, really significant conversation. But you're really starting, and this is what people should know, our African American series, our exploration into Black history, Black life in America, culture, politics, history, social movements, and the like. And so I can't think of a better person to have taken the maiden voyage with. We inaugurated it with Raven, folks. Raven Schwam-Curtis, TikTok star, and the conscience of a generation learning how to forge identity, create identity, and understand identity. Raven, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Adam. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Raven.
Adam.
There we were, there you were, and then some. Do you I would like you to, because I can't ask it enough, right? I want you to, I think because what you're doing is so important, I want you to share why you think what you're doing is so important with this live audience. Just again, I don't think we can say it enough. So let's hear.
Absolutely. I mean, well, I'm a Black and Jewish educator, and I decided to lean into this specific type of education because I feel like the relationship between the Black and Jewish community is seldom like really discussed at length. We kind of stop at the 1950s, civil rights era. Wow, look at the solidarity we had, but there's not necessarily an attentiveness to what has happened since then. Like, what are the origins of our discontents? What are the tensions? And how do we work to like unpack those and resolve those? And so I think a lot of the work I'm doing now is centered around that. But both because that's deeply personal to me as someone who's Black and Jewish and cares about how my communities relate to one another, but also because I think it has wider implications for how we imagine liberation more broadly. And I'm choosing to do that through social media because it's accessible. It's a democratized place to think and learn and dialogue together. And instead of, only relegating myself, as I kind of mentioned in the podcast, to doing this work within academia, which is still worthwhile, I want to have a broader conversation with as many people as possible.
Yeah, right. What you're doing. I mean, one thing I have to say that's encouraging, and I tweeted it this week, and it applies to the work you're doing, is I tell people this: you have to, not you, but we as a country have to recognize that if progress wasn't being made, okay, and we weren't getting closer to our creedal promise and becoming more inclusive, there wouldn't be a right-wing backlash. So as horrible as that is, that means things are changing, because that's the most resistant forces to change are typically the forces of reaction, right? So again, I think, which is to say that the work you're doing, when you have, assholes like Ron DeSantis, not just removing AP African American Studies, diminishing it, rendering it sort of this woke irrelevance thing under this we are not indoctrinating our children bullshit. People like yourself and others are making those videos and reaching so many more people to tell them how important it is. Your generation cares more and listens more to each other, I think. I mean, even if this were a Democratic governor doing something great, yes, while it would go viral and people would be applauding it rather than disdaining it, I still think your message is an antidote. I still think you're doing that work. And that's one way you fight it. We at the podcast say we fight for democracy right here. There's different ways to fight. Your presence on TikTok, you are a vanguard for how to navigate identity and how to be a human being and what that means, and blowing apart all those myths and those binaries that you spoke about so eloquently in the interview. I was going to also say that in the interview, and I'd forgotten this, and I think you should, if you've run with it and I haven't seen it, I know you probably have done, but the Black Jewish disintegration or the Black Jewish inflection point was the creation of Israel. And I think, going back to 1948 and then that, fed into, that was pre-civil rights years. And then of course, Jews were so instrumental in the civil rights movement. But, tensions were burbling. And I think that's a really interesting, it's something that people should never forget because, contemporaneous debates about Israel tend to often be in a vacuum, and contemporaneous debates about race are in a vacuum. You are traversing all this different terrain,
Mhm.
personally, ideologically. I think it's marvelous.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I'm doing my best to unpack really heavy, difficult topics and like
Yeah.
these brief kind of 15, 30, 60-second videos that are digestible and accessible to folks. So, I mean, if I can help illuminate some truths about the world with my platform, then that's really what it's about for me. And if that touches someone's heart, that informs someone's politics, how they view the world, move through the world in a positive way, then that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and you are. And again, not to put too fine a point on it, you and colleagues and friends and activists like you guys can beat back this right wing backlash, because it isn't all going to come. You're not always going to win elections.
Right.
You're not always going to get that dream candidate in there, and that means the work
Right.
is on all of us. And I always say,
Mhm.
democracy only lives if we are tireless,
Mhm. Mhm.
because the the opponents of democracy, and there are many of them right here at home,
Mhm.
they're counting on our apathy. They're counting on your generation to say, ah, we've gotten a raw deal. Why should we vote? No, you don't want Marjorie Taylor Greene in the White House. Trust me, that's why you vote. And we've already had Donald Trump, and anything is possible. So
Mhm.
you get people like DeSantis. It turns out over 12% of Democrats didn't even vote for the Florida gubernatorial election.
Wow.
That would have significantly narrowed DeSantis's 19-point win. And
Mm.
again, Charlie Crist wasn't a good candidate, but imagine there was a good candidate and there had been active turnout.
Mhm.
This may we be singing a different tune, and this guy now has a platform to be president of the United States. So important that you do what you're doing. Your space is not um, marginal at all, and you know that. But I mean, it's as impactful because it's the work of culture,
Mm.
doing politics and keeping it together. So you know,
100%.
yeah. So I just want to thank you again for doing this. You're a friend of the program. Well, I've known you since you're 12, but you are a friend and a friend, and I adore you. I want to thank everybody. I also want to plug Raven at Raven Reveals. That is their handle across social media.
Mhm.
By the way, Raven, I am now obsessed with TikTok. We're on it as Dirty Moderate. I'm just obsessed with it. Just the whole format of it. So I see the appeal. Also, please note that Raven Schwam-Curtis is available as a keynote speaker. There's a link tree in
Yes.
their bio and bios. So book them now for your own enlightenment. Um, and this is what we need in America, the teaching moments, and that's what you're doing. Folks, thank you, Raven, of course, and thank you, Dirty Moderates, for joining us, for letting us share this President's Day with you. In the meantime, stay dirty, stay moderate, stay
Mhm.
safe.